All right, guys, we're going to start things off here with a little plug for my upcoming event, Subspectrum, which is returning to Des Moines March 2nd for our second installment of the Subspectrum Tournament Series. This will be a full round-robin tournament, gi and no gi, for kids, teens, adults, men, women, masters, etc. We will also have cash prize absolute divisions. So there will be 4 of those cash prize absolute divisions: the men's gi, the men's no gi, the women's gi, and the women's no gi. Each one of those winners is going to take $400 cash. So we're giving away $1,600 cash at our tournament series. And then later in the night, we have Subspectrum 7, our 7th pro installment of the Subspectrum Pro Series, which will feature the women's 135-pound championship with women from all across the nation, the men's 135-pound championship also with men from all across the nation, and then we will also be hosting the first ever Iowa Jiu-Jitsu dual team championships, which will be 4 teams from here in central Iowa, 5v5, battling it out for $2,000 cash and the title of Iowa dual team champions. So if you're interested in anything associated with that event, you can check out our website, www.subspectrumbjj.com. You can register for the event there. You can check out our events list, check out our rules, everything associated with Subspectrum. Otherwise, check us out on social media. Facebook, we're Subspectrum. Instagram and Twitter, @Subspectrum. And of course, if you're listening to this podcast, you're already here on the YouTube channel, but just make sure you subscribe to the Subspectrum YouTube channel so you can stay up to date with our future podcasts and all the other content that we release here on the Subspectrum YouTube channel. Let's go ahead and get things started here. Episode 2 of the Full Spectrum Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Full Spectrum Podcast. My name is Jordan Peitzman, and this is my fake-ass radio voice.
Seriously, though, thank you guys for tuning in today. This is the second episode of the Full Spectrum Podcast. Today on the show, we have an old friend of mine, Trevor Voelker, kid that I went to school with. We grew up together, rode the bus together, played sports all through high school and middle school together. So for anybody wondering what specifically his draw is for the Full Spectrum Podcast, it's the fact that he was a high-level wrestler. He was able to make the state finals here at the Iowa High School State Wrestling Championships as a senior in high school and place as the runner-up. Anybody that knows anything about the state of Iowa and wrestling knows that that's not an easy achievement or an easy accomplishment to have under your belt. He also went on to wrestle at Iowa State and make the team there. He was a 400-meter dash state champion in high school. So just an incredibly athletic, disciplined, tough mindset, intense personality, and somebody that I'm really interested to get in here and talk to. Something that I've always admired about him and looked up to and kind of respected through our times growing up was his ability to push through extremely hard times, whether it was the sprints at the end of football practice, whether it was, a really tough match that he had to grit out to get the win in wrestling, or if it was, coming back from being 7th place in the final 200 of the 400-meter dash to win. So we're going to get him in here, sit him down, get him on the mics, and just kind of dig into the mind of Trevor Voelker, see what it is that built that discipline in his life, what it took to build such a tough mentality that allowed him to push through really hard times in places where other people seemingly couldn't. So we're going to get him in here. We're going to talk for about 5 to 10 minutes, do a little introduction, get you guys knowing Trevor Voelker. Then we're actually going to pause the podcast. We're going to get out on the mats. He's going to show me some wrestling. I'm going to show him some jiu-jitsu. We're going to talk about the similarities and the differences between the two grappling arts. And then we're going to come back in here, sit back down, and give you guys our take on that. So without any further ado, Trevor Voelker. And we're live. We're here with my good friend, Trevor Voelker. Haven't talked to you in a while. This will be fun, man. How you been?
I've been pretty good. Yeah, it has been a while. It's been probably, a good 4 or 5 years now?
Yeah, definitely. Probably since your days at Iowa State, back in our good old party days.
Yeah.
So I just want to get right into it because this was something I was going to bring up anyways, but you kind of reaffirmed it with getting here 20 minutes early. He texted me, asked if I was here yet, and you just go ahead and hit a 2-mile run while you're waiting for me to do that. Something that I've always respected and admired about you was your work ethic and your ability to push through like really hard times throughout athletics in high school, whether it be football, wrestling, track, all the above. So just interested to see where that discipline and where that drive and where that mentality and that mindset comes from.
Oh, I would say most of it comes from just having a little bit too much energy. If I ain't burning it, I'm going to be throwing it out somewhere else, and that's just the majority of it. Like today, having to get those 2 miles in, I knew we'd be coming in here full of energy. Haven't seen each other in a while, so I wanted to get some of that nervous energy off and just really, come in here with a cool, calm head.
Nice, man. That's pretty cool. I think a lot of people don't really think of exercise as something that they can use to relax. But for me, especially jiu-jitsu and running specifically, I think running's a thing where you can get into like a little bit of a groove, and you're kind of you don't have to think a lot while you're running, but also you can think a lot is the other thing, and that's what we also find about jiu-jitsu is that it's pretty hard to think about like your bills and your shitty home life when somebody's trying to choke you out. So I imagine that's kind of similar when you're running. It's hard to think about the harder things in life when you're just trying to push through and get done with this run and get back to your house or whatever. But I don't think running's ever been something that's been too difficult for you, is it?
No, running's always been something that's came real easy. As you know, I did pretty well in track growing up. I used to, back in middle school days, my dad would have me running home from football practice. He'd have me running home from wrestling practice, and that was just something always I could just crank right out.
And that wasn't just like a half mile, was it?
That was
How far away was that house from the school there in Dallas Center?
About 4.5, 5 mile round.
4.5 mile. So you get done with the hour and a half, 2 hour football practice, and then you're running 4 or 5 miles home.
Yeah.
I guess it's no secret where some of that discipline came from. I see you're wearing a Keep Hammering hat, so definitely a Cameron Haynes fan, and it's something that I could definitely see you falling into. We talked about it before the show, but whether it's hunting or long distance running, that just seems like your kind of guy. Is that somebody you've recently started following, or? Yeah,
I've been plugging into his stuff here for the past year and a half or so. That old boy is crazy, though. Talk about running 100-milers. That's something that's a little bit out of my realm. I'm looking to do my first marathon here in this next year. Been training for a little bit. That's part of that 2-mile run I hit coming in. But, he's definitely something special. Definitely something to look up to.
Definitely an interesting human being. And somebody that, like you said, somebody you can look up to for discipline and that mentality and that insane mindset that gets you to places that the majority of people don't get to go because they aren't willing to push through those hard times.
Definitely.
Yeah. Obviously this is a grappling podcast, so we want to kind of touch on some of the grappling stuff. As I explained in the intro, you were a runner-up here in Iowa as a senior. Lost in the finals, and then you went on to wrestle at Iowa State, a very prestigious wrestling university here in the United States. Just kind of talk to me about like what your upbringing was with wrestling and how you got into the sport, how you got to be, to the level that you were at. Obviously, I don't think you probably in your head think you reached the level that you would have liked to, but I think everybody else is pretty impressed with what you were able to accomplish in that time.
Well, wrestling for me was definitely a family affair, so to speak. I had a uncle who happened to be a 2-time national champ at Iowa State, wrestled right around the same exact weight that I did. So that was something I was definitely chasing. It was really cool. He happened to be my middle school coach, followed me up in the high school ranks as I was going through there as a volunteer, and then he was able to get an assistant job at Iowa State as I started up there as a freshman. So he really followed me all the way through and helped me pursue those dreams. Wrestling was just something, it was always, this is it. You're going to be wrestling. So, it was always super enjoyable for me. I loved it.
Yeah. And so, I mean, a lot of our listeners come from around the nation, but most people know Iowa as a wrestling state, so it's no surprise that was something that was bred into you from a young age. I'm sure there's a lot of kids, and I mean, definitely other kids within our school that had a similar mindset, but it seems like you were definitely, at least at the time when I was in high school, reached the highest levels of anybody that I wrestled around. So for those of you, I just kind of preview this. We're just going to talk here for a little bit, get a little intro, get you guys knowing Trevor, and then we're actually going to pause the podcast. We're going to go out, hit the mats here at No Coast BJJ, and just kind of talk about the similarities, differences, etc. between wrestling and jiu-jitsu. I know, Trevor, you've expressed maybe a little bit of interest in getting into jiu-jitsu, so this will be a nice time to introduce you and kind of show you those similarities where you could, I mean, a really good wrestler that comes in here and is willing to learn can progress incredibly fast over these other people that just aren't used to that like high level of grappling. Anybody that's reached a high level in grappling like you have is going to come in with a completely different skill set than most people are used to, I think, in the jiu-jitsu world. So that'll be really interesting to get on the mat with you and teach you some things. I'm sure you can definitely teach me some things about wrestling that'll help me. I'm preparing for a lot of ADCC style tournaments, and those are geared more towards points in jiu-jitsu, so there are a lot of wrestlers that get jiu-jitsu skills and then they do very well in that rule set, so I'll definitely be interested to see some of your takedown tips and things like that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we want to cover before we hit the mats.
Let's roll, brother.
All right, let's do it. And we're back. We spent a little time on the mats there, just talked about a little bit of wrestling versus jiu-jitsu, some of the similarities, some of the differences. What'd you think, man?
You know, I thought it was pretty good. One comparison I made while we were out in the mats, and I was a little bit afraid of saying this, but a lot of the funk you're seeing in wrestling nowadays has a lot of similarities to some of the sweeps you were throwing at me, and you know, people diving under, grabbing certain things here and there. I'm seeing a lot of similarities there. So you know, the young kids coming up, that could be a super easy transition from them coming from wrestling to jiu-jitsu or vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's weird. I've even noticed it in some of that scrambling wrestling. You'll see, and it's not like an actual leg lock, but they're wrapping up the ankle in like really weird positions and using that to manipulate the person's body to get the takedown or get, you know, what would be considered the sweep. Because basically, I mean, a sweep in no-gi wrestling is a takedown. That's what it turns into. No-gi sweeps turn into wrestling because you're going to have to take the person down. They're not just going to let you sweep them, especially at the highest levels.
Yeah.
So I've seen some of that Ben Askren funk come from wrestling over into jiu-jitsu. And I think that's why he had such an easy transition between wrestling and submission grappling, is because he already kind of had that funky style that played into jiu-jitsu, and you're definitely seeing it now.
He's still funky as a goon, man. He's funky.
Excited to see him in the UFC. That's something I've waited a long time to see. Have you kind of followed up with, or noticed that he is coming up in the UFC? He's getting ready to have his first fight.
Yeah, I've been watching a little bit. I know he had some issues with Dana White back in the day, from what I saw, I guess. I haven't followed it too hard, to be honest with you, but I'm excited, too, to see him in there. Just be excited to see what he can do.
Yeah. So from everything we did out there on the mat, what seemed to captivate you the most? That's the parts that interested you the most.
For me, we touched base on this just a little bit, but like my wrestling style was never something that came from a strength perspective, and jiu-jitsu is definitely something, you know, taking a smaller, maybe weaker person and teaching them techniques to be able to subdue an opponent. That could, you know, and so a lot of that stuff, you know, the flow coming from your feet, transitioning into guard, and everything that plays off of that. There's just a real flow about it, and being a more technical person myself, that's something that really intrigues me, and it's definitely something that interests me.
Yeah,
it's good stuff.
I noticed you mentioned the angles, and I think a lot of people think of wrestling, and I even mentioned it when we were out there on the mats, that they think of it as kind of like a head-to-head thing, but if you're watching it at the highest levels, the guys are so good with their techniques that they're hitting those really good angles, and they're getting those big takedowns, and they look almost effortless, and it's because that, you know, they're doing the technique properly. It's not like they're just diving in there, picking the dude up and slamming him on his back with no technique, you know, bar fight style. They're creating those really good angles that allow them to penetrate and attack at their strongest point against someone at one of their weaker points. And that's what I would consider, like a really good explanation of jiu-jitsu, is using my strongest parts of my body and my strongest attributes to manipulate or subdue the smallest or weakest parts of your body. My entire body versus one of your limbs, whether it's an arm, a leg, or the neck. My entire body squeezing into that rear naked choke, my knees coming to my chest, that whole core tightening and finishing that choke using my entire body versus your carotid arteries. And like I said, if somebody's carotid arteries can fight your entire body, you do not fight that person. You make friends with him, you buy him a beer, and you ask him how he does his neck workouts.
Call her a day, go home. Oh man, yeah. For those of you listening, I'm roughly 210, about 6'3". Jordan, how big would you say you are?
5'11", about 170.
Yeah. So we're rolling around on the mat, and Jordan slaps a triangle on me. We're just messing around a little bit. Within seconds, boom, the stars are blinking.
Yeah, I forgot to tell you could tap out beforehand. So I threw that triangle on, and then you start making the funny noises, and then all of a sudden I see you kind of like doing the, making the hand motions, like, oh, am I trying to wake up? But yeah, so we got a little bit of a not quite unconscious, but
we had a taste.
Taste of the choking life here in jiu-jitsu. Good introduction for you, man.
Yeah, definitely.
So. Shit, what am I thinking?
So I've actually, I've got a question for you, Jordan, because you came from a wrestling background a little bit, and you've been doing the same for, 4.5 years now?
A little over 5 years now.
Over 5.
Yeah, November was my 5-year anniversary. So
when you were first kicking off, what were some of the things you were having issues with, or like what were some of the things that were transitioning from wrestling over to jiu-jitsu? What were some of the things you were hanging up on, that type of thing?
Yeah, so it's something I talked to you out there on the mat about, but like the biggest thing is people in wrestling always want to go forward. In jiu-jitsu, sometimes that's not like the best plan of action. If we're moving forward, we're actually putting ourselves into danger. We're throwing ourselves into their guard. We're putting ourselves into the places where they can take advantage of that energy. And a lot of jiu-jitsu is more like just having a really good base and settling down into positions and then working from a really good base rather than just gritting through it and putting my head over my knees and like driving into someone's guard. And you'll see that a lot when people start out, and that's something that I had a problem with, is I would get inside someone's closed guard, and because you feel like you can't posture up and get your posture back and get your head towards the ceiling, you feel like you have to just drive forward and grind through their guard, and you don't realize that you have to fight the legs first. That's really the whole idea of passing the guard, is you have to get past the legs, right? So you can't be like crushing on the upper body and expect to get past the legs. You have to kind of settle into that base, break the legs open, break the guard open. So we didn't go over a lot of guard break stuff, but we can if you ever come back in here. But breaking the guard open and then pinning the hips. You want to pin their hips to the mat and then getting over the legs, under the legs, or around the legs. And I always just wanted to go straight through. So you put yourself in a lot of trouble. Sweeps, anytime your head's or your base is over your knees or your shoulders are in front of your knees, you're going to put yourself in trouble for those sweeps. And then also submissions. I always wanted to separate my arms, and that got me in a lot of trouble with triangles, and that seems to be somewhat kind of common for wrestlers coming into jiu-jitsu. They get caught in a lot of arm bars, arm bars, triangles, and sweeps, and that's something I dealt with a lot for sure. Other things is giving up your back. So like in wrestling, if you get taken down, you want to go to your knees and give your back up, because that's like the position that you can best fight out of in wrestling. But obviously that exposes your back. We talked a lot about the back position in there, and getting that chest to back connection, getting that seatbelt, and then putting in the hooks, or as you like to call them, the boots.
The boots.
Yeah. So all of our wrestling or catch wrestling listeners out there, we've got a wrestler in here using the word boots. So
throwing the boots in, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. Run through a little bit, I don't know if this is common in the jiu-jitsu world, but this is something I really grabbed onto. Run through a little bit of your checklist out there that you have up on the wall, talking about posture, talking about positioning, all that stuff.
Yeah, so I like to teach in concepts. A lot of people like to teach techniques, and they'll teach, put the elbow here, put the arm here, put your leg here, and I like to give people basically 5 steps. And from the top and from the bottom, they're actually very, very similar. The games that you're playing are very similar. You're just playing them in reverse order. So if you're playing from the bottom, you're trying to destroy someone's base structure, posture, and alignment. If I'm on top of somebody, I'm trying to maintain my base structure, posture, and alignment in order to keep myself in an advantageous position. So I work people, whether it's the guard game or passing the guard, I talk about controlling posture. So if you're on top, controlling your posture. If you're on bottom, controlling their posture. The second step, for isolating or for sweeps or submissions in general, is isolating limbs. So isolating whatever necessary limbs those are. For an armbar, it's going to be the one arm. For the triangle, it's obviously going to be separating the 2 arms and isolating the one arm inside the triangle, isolating one arm outside of the triangle. Beyond isolating limbs, I talk about separating the elbows from the hips. So if I'm attacking a submission from the bottom and the person on top's elbows are close to their knees or close to their hips, they're going to have a really good base, and it's going to be hard for me to be able to attack those limbs and attack those sweeping positions. So creating separation between the hips and the knee, or the hips and knees and the elbows. And then past that, I talk about creating alignment with whatever it is you're attacking. So if I'm attacking an armbar, I want to put myself in a perfect alignment where his arm is directly down my sternum. It's like basically in line with my spine, so that I can use my strongest muscles, my strongest motions, which are a leg curl and a bridge, to finish that armbar. If it's a triangle, I'm trying to get that angle so that I'm doing a leg curl on his neck instead of like squeezing my, I always forget if it's adductors or abductors.
Either way, it's brutal. I'll tell you firsthand, it's brutal.
I really like that conceptual style of teaching, where you're teaching people steps rather than techniques in specific places where everything needs to go.
Yeah, I was definitely excited to see that when we were talking about it, because so much of wrestling these days, you're looking to maintain position. You're looking to, exploit when other kids or other men, for that matter, are out of position. So much of it. If you're following wrestling at a high level, you look at Kyle Snyder. That dude is a brick shit house from top to bottom, and the one thing he does consistently is maintain a great position. That's how he's been able to compete at the highest level for so long, is he's maintaining that position. His posture's good. He's not opening himself up for attacks. So like when you guys are talking about all that positioning stuff and maintaining your distance and everything, that stuff just resonates exponentially with wrestling.
Yeah, absolutely. If you never put yourself in a bad position, if you're constantly in a good position where you're not really being able to attack, your opponent's going to mess up at some point, and then you're going to be able to take advantage of that mess up and capitalize on those mistakes. So I think that's a really big part of wrestling. That's a really big part of jiu-jitsu. It's really a big part of any martial art or any sport for that matter. But I think just making the game more scientific is what makes it easier for people to learn. Makes it easier for people to progress faster, and it just makes the techniques and the concepts easier to digest for a lot of people.
Absolutely. So you talked a little bit about teaching concepts. Wrestling world, some of you can relate. You have your A, B, and C game plans on the feet. You got your single leg, high crotch, double leg, or whatever order you want to throw that in. Top position. You're looking for spiral breakdowns, cross wrist rides, that sort of thing. From bottom, you got your stand-up, your switches, that sort of thing. Give me a little bit of a taste of, you're talking about concepts, talking about going from your feet to the guard, working into different positions to benefit yourself. I guess, what are a couple of those key techniques that you guys are throwing in? Just real baseline stuff that things sort of stem out from, and you can really create like a tree of technique off of.
Mm-hmm. So from the standing position, at least for the manner that I like to teach in, I play a lot of half guard, so I do pull guard some, but I do have takedowns as well, and I like to play a lot of like front headlock position. So that's a big position in jiu-jitsu, and it's obviously something that you have to have at a high level in wrestling, as well as being able to snap somebody down into that front headlock and being able to attack from there. So you have all the same traditional attacks that you would see in wrestling, but then you also have all of those chokes that I was showing you too. So you've got your darces, you've got your guillotines, you've got all the necktie series, and then you can also use that position to take the back. The same way you would to spin around and go for for two in wrestling. You're looking to take the back, get that seatbelt, get those boots as you like to call them, or hooks as we call them here in jiu-jitsu, to get those in and look to take the back. Because in my opinion, that's the strongest finishing position in the sport of jiu-jitsu, is being on somebody's back. That's where I personally, if somebody's on my back, I feel the most vulnerable. And when I'm on somebody's back, I feel like there's no way they can get away. And I've got so many options with all of the traditional chokes. Your rear naked chokes, your palm to palm choke, and then you talk about the Kimura Grip that I was showing you from everywhere. That's something that's also really prevalent from the back. You can go right into that Kimura Grip, and then I've got all of my same attacks from there, whether it's the arm bar, transitioning back to the back if they get away, the scissor choke, triangles. There's a back mount triangle there. I didn't show you that one, but just so much from the back mount position that you can attack. So that's, if I was to say that like what my A game is either to take somebody to that front headlock position, snap them down and go to the back, or pull that half guard position, work into my sweeps game and go to the back from there. Because I like to play a lot of Kimura, as I was showing you, that half guard sweep with the Kimura, and a lot of other positions that I attack the Kimura from, and I use that Kimura to take people's backs. They're so worried about the threat of the loaded gun that is the Kimura. They have to respect that threat the entire time, or else their shoulder's going to get torn apart. That it opens up all those other positions, whether it's the back, the arm bar, or some of those chokes. So yeah, just really getting to someone's back is what I'm really looking for ultimately.
So when you get to someone's back, because wrestling, obviously you're working towards pinholds, that sort of thing. When you're getting to someone's back, are you more there for a... Because I know there's some issues. I don't know if it's necessarily an issue, but there's some talk about stalling, right? We talked about that a little bit when we were out on the mat. Whether if you get somebody's back and you're just jumping on like a backpack, you're just holding until you get to overtime, until you can get into one of those positions to give you that edge to where you can actually finish a match. I don't know if this is giving away too much of your technique, but when you're getting someone's back, are you looking for more of those stalling holds, or are you attacking from there? How's that game plan work out?
I'm always looking to attack. That's just my style of grappling. I don't want to be an unexciting grappler. There's a lot of guys that don't care. They just want to go out there and win. They don't care if they just get a takedown and hold somebody until the end of the match. But I want jiu-jitsu to be exciting. I want people to want to watch me. So I'm always looking to attack. But when I get on someone's back, I think immediately I want to look for really, really good control. Making sure I have that full seatbelt, the choking arm's threaded all the way through. I'm protecting my choking arm with the arm that's lacing up underneath the armpit, and I'm hiding that hand in the armpit. And that's just good basics for back mount position. Having those really tight hooks, making sure I'm keeping my knees close to my chest, so that I'm like a backpack with the straps tightened all the way on someone's back. But then once I get that really full control, I'm looking for their reaction. So I'm looking for them to try to slide out, get their shoulders flat. I'm looking for them to try to turn up to their knees and turn into me. And I have techniques, I won't give away exactly what I'm doing in those positions, but I'm looking for a reaction that I can capitalize on, because I'm thinking 2 moves ahead of them. They're just thinking about escaping the back mount, and I'm looking to attack them as they're escaping already, because I know exactly how they're going to escape. Based, there's 2 or 3 different super basic ways to escape the back mount position. So based on the way their hips are moving, or the way their head's turning a certain way, or their shoulders are going flat to the mat, I know what escape they're going for, and I'm ready to attack something immediately off of that.
Yeah, the way you talk about that makes me think, you bring somebody to a crossroads, and on the other side of each road you've got a bush, right? no matter which way you go, you got a big bad wolf waiting behind one of those bushes.
Damn right. I love that. That's an awesome.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good analogy. But yeah, so I actually, there's a position a lot of people call the Kimura Trap, and there's a particular position that I get the Kimura Trap, and I call it my trick question, because there's 4 answers, and no matter what, they're all wrong. It's a multiple choice.
Oh, baby.
It's a multiple choice question, and every answer's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a trick question, and so that's like a perfect like analogy in comparison to my trick question, to what you were saying about the crossroads and the big bad wolves behind every bush.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah,
man. Because the same thing applies for wrestling. You got your A technique. Let's say I'm shooting a high crotch. Gentleman's always going to have a counter for that, right? Whether he's sprawling, whether he's controlling hands, yada yada yada. But you always have that B plan, that C plan in the back pocket. Make something happen, even when things are stacked against you a little bit. So yeah, I definitely correlate with that, 100%.
yeah. And I imagine that the guys at the highest levels, they're doing the exact same thing, just on one, they're way quicker, and 2, they probably have a handful of more options. We're probably, at least for me as a jiu-jitsu player, I'm probably dealing with 2 or 3 things that I'm threatening in every position, and if they defend one, I'm ready to hit one of the other 2. And I just imagine that the highest level black belts are probably doing that, but they're doing it with and actually, I say that they're doing it with a lot of techniques, but I think once you actually get to the highest levels, they're boiling it down to literally probably 2 things. They know that you're going to move one of 2 directions, and they're ready to capitalize on either one at the snap of a finger. The second you move your hips a certain way, they already know which way you're going, and they're playing steps and steps ahead of you.
Now, I do want to stop you and ask about one thing, because in wrestling, you hear somebody say, like, oh, he plays wrestling. Like, no. We don't play wrestling. We wrestle. But you just said, and I've heard it several times, jiu-jitsu player. Is that, is there any sort of heat behind that, or is it just is what it is type of thing?
For me specifically, it's just something that, sometimes when I'm on a podcast or something, weird words will come out of my mouth. I don't usually use that in normal talk or anything. If I was to label myself, I'd call myself a submission grappler. I don't even think I'm necessarily jiu-jitsu, because jiu-jitsu, while it is, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. It's centered around the gi. Even though there is no gi jiu-jitsu, a lot of what jiu-jitsu is, and a lot of the beautiful art of jiu-jitsu, is dealing with those grips with the gi. And that's something we should have put on a gi today, because then you would have. It's a completely different world. It's not even the same sport almost, because you're dealing with so much more push-pull. It's kind of like a game of tug-of-war, so much more push-pull, because I can grab onto your collar, I can grab onto your pants, I can grab onto your lapels that are hanging out, I can grab your belt. So there's all these new grips that are introduced that can be used to control another human being. You'll see Keenan Cornelius, he's one of a really high-level black belt in the world, and he has this thing he calls worm guard. So he takes your own lapel and he wraps it around your leg, he wraps it around his own leg, he does all this crazy shit to be able to control your posture. And it's all based off using the clothing, using the gi. So I don't necessarily consider myself a jiu-jitsu player, as I said earlier on, just because I don't. I do train in the gi, but my style and my game has never really been centered around the grips using the gi. I'm basically a wrestler in a gi. And actually, one of my very first tournaments, that's what one of the corners or coaches' corners said. He's just a wrestler with a gi on. And then I think I proceeded to armbar him or something. I think it was triangle actually. I ended up pulling guard and triangling him. So it was kind of funny that he thought I was just a wrestler, and then I pull guard and show some traditional jiu-jitsu. But yeah, no real. I wouldn't say there's any heat or animosity between the term of jiu-jitsu player. One thing I will say is a lot of people will try to call themselves jiu-jitsu fighters, and I hate that. It's not a fight, We're not punching each other in the face. There's no knees. There's no kicks. Nobody's. Somebody might lose a tooth from a headbutt or something, but in general, we're not really putting our brain health on the line. So I don't feel comfortable calling myself a fighter.
Right. And
a lot of people do. They'll call it, I've got a fight this weekend, and they're talking about their jiu-jitsu match. And for some people, I guess That's what they want to refer to it as, but you'll never hear me call one of my jiu-jitsu matches a fight or call myself a jiu-jitsu fighter unless you see me doing MMA.
Definitely. No, that makes sense. I've heard that thrown around a couple times, and that was something I definitely wanted to ask you about, and you brought it up, so it was perfect timing.
All right, man. I know you got to get out of here. So you got anything else you want to ask me about, or we good to go?
I think we're gonna be all right. Just keep hammering away, bud. Looks like you're doing big things here, and it's exciting. It's exciting to be around.
Thank you, man.
Most
I appreciate
definitely.
it. And hopefully we can get you back in here on the mats sometime. Maybe get you to take a class or something. Just give you a little dip your toes in and see what things are. We gave the other today, but coming to a real class and learning like a specific outline or technique or something like that, I think would be a really cool experience for you. So anytime you want to come in, man, we do a free week here at No Coast, so come on and try it out.
Heck yeah, sounds good, man.
All right.
Catch you on the next one.
All right, guys. That's it for this episode of the Full Spectrum Podcast. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We're at Subspectrum. Jordan Peitzman, Trevor Voelker. We're out.